All right. Okay. So let's talk about the course. Anyone is taking the CFA? No. Okay. So this course is quite similar to CFA level 3. So if you are taking a CFA, which is a Chartered Financial Analyst certification, there are 3 levels. So if you're planning to take it, I'll recommend to keep this stack of notes or this stack of notes from class. When you eventually reach level 3, one of the questions of CFA level 3 will be a case study asking you about portfolio management. So these notes will be very useful, and do keep it on hand. All right. Okay, so we talk about the study guide, lecture notes. So I'll repeat again about the lecture slides. So those of you who are in my class, basically all of you are here, you're in my class, you'll notice that your stack of notes are very different from your friends. And basically what I do is I like to put as much details instead of just putting some bullet points and you'll have to, jot down a lot of notes. So I like to put all the details there. So for revision purpose, or even for future reference, for like let's say the CFA level 3, you can just flip through the notes and you can see all the details, right? And I mentioned earlier that the course is quite rigorous in a sense that there are quite thick stack of notes, and questions are both quantitative and qualitative. You'll see a lot of case study, which are quite heavy. They are very lengthy questions, right? Yeah, thank you too. Oh yeah, so what else? Oh yeah, so I'll repeat again. If any of y'all have any questions, simply unmute yourself anytime throughout the whole discussion lecture, and then we'll answer questions or just type in the group chat. At the same time, I want to highlight that for the GBA groupings, kindly send them to me by the end of this lesson, your groups. If not, I'll just randomly allocate and I'll post the groupings on the announcement board so everyone can have a look at what are the groupings for their teammates. I think I received already 1 grouping, so that's good. Of course, I hope you all have done your pre-course quiz. That's ended, and the school is very strict about this pre-course quiz. So if you don't do it, I'm sorry, you have to drop out of the course. All right. I guess being year 3 and 4, this is not that's very familiar. It's not uncommon to you on this assignment schedule. All right. Okay. So just want to say up front that the first lecture, it's a lot of theory. So some of you might feel a bit dry, very boring. So I encourage you all to just unmute yourself and chat with everybody, ask some questions. I will not go line by line and talk about each component or each line on the slides, because most of them you can just read them yourself. And yeah, so let's start. Any questions before we kickstart the lecture? Very good. All of you are good. Yeah, no, very good. Okay, perfect. Then, okay, first lecture, as I mentioned, it's about portfolio management. So we'll talk about the basis of portfolio management, and we'll focus a lot on this document called the Investment Policy Statement, or IPS. All right, and then we go into detail in each component of IPS. And I always like to put it or make this concept very simple, and at the same time try to relate this to how are you all being tested at the end of the day. So you don't feel like you're just studying and it's like, oh, you don't know how it's being tested. So at the end of the day, right, for this first lecture, how it's being tested is in terms of a case study. So we give you a case study, we'll see 2 examples later, and then you're asked to evaluate the IPS or write an IPS. So you need to know the various components of IPS, which are, I think, 9 components. All right. So let's start with what's portfolio management. I believe some of you are also in finance, the finance track. So if you ever be a portfolio manager or wealth manager, this is something that is quite important. And as I mentioned earlier, this is related to your CFA level 3. Okay, okay, yeah, thanks for asking about class part. So basically class part, you can just, it's first of all, asking questions and of course attending lessons. But at the end of the day, class part, no one will fail class part. Everyone basically gets the base 50%, but anything above 50% is your participation in class or asking questions, basically. All right. Thanks for the question. So so what's portfolio management? Basically, portfolio management is the idea of not only having one stock. So for example, if you buy a stock from the stock market now, right, that's one stock. So that's not portfolio. And when you have multiple stocks or even other instruments such as bond, you have your real estate, and that's where it's called a portfolio. And this course is about teaching you how to manage the portfolio for your clients. And we'll talk about various clients as well, right? So not all clients are the same. So in terms of managing this portfolio, there are various steps. So you talk about, first of all, planning, right? So you need to plan what's your strategy. We talk about risks and returns. Now, I hope these are not unfamiliar. Then we, of course, need to execute. And then last but not least, we have the feedback. So let me just pull out my pen so that it's not like a, so it's a bit more interactive. So we have your execution and then finally your feedback, right? Evaluate whether a portfolio is making money, whether it meets the requirement, etc. So this process, this three process is quite dynamic. We'll go from planning, execution, feedback, and all the way back to planning again. Okay. Remember, at the end of the day, if there's any questions, just stop me. All right. So this is the graphical or representation of the portfolio management process. So when we talk about planning, first of all, we need to think about, okay, first, what are the objectives of the investor? So your client comes to you, right? And then it's like, oh, you know, I have some money, I want to invest in something. So you need to ask, oh, no, what are your objective? What do you want? And so we'll go in detail in all these components, don't worry, in the following slides. Now, this is just a broad overview. And after that, you need to consider what's the market environment now. As you know, now the inflation is very high, right? Your fixed deposit is paying you quite a lot. Your stock market is not doing well. So all these are some considerations that you need to take into account. Maybe there's some social factors as well, or even political factors. Maybe your client is non-Singaporean. Maybe he's in Canada, like me, or maybe he's in, I don't know, China, or yeah. So there are various things that you need to take into account. Or what sector is he working in a bank? Is he in manufacturing? So there are various factors you need to consider as outside his objective. And through considering this, then you form a market expectation. Like, for example, you know, nowadays, if you read the papers, you know, fixed deposits paying very high, right? Around 4.2%. If they're paying so high and stocks are not doing too well, will you recommend your client to go to fixed deposit instead? But maybe he's very aggressive investor. He wants to get even more than 4.2. Then maybe you will look at other options. So this is one option. And then after you form your policy and strategy of your portfolio. Now, so this is the planning phase. And then next you go for execution. You construct a portfolio, you know, you allocate the assets, you know, whether you are doing like maybe gold or you do, I don't know, just now we talk about fixed deposit, equity, and then you try to optimize your portfolio. And after you create your portfolio, you let it run, right? You let it run for, let's say, 1 year, 2 years, and then you monitor first of all, the objective, whether it meets the objective of your portfolio, and then you monitor the investor kind of like input, you know. Along the way, you know, life changes, right? Maybe he has a baby. Maybe he decides to, I don't know, further his studies and lose an income stream, right? So because of that, you need to adjust your portfolio to meet his requirements. So let's say if he loses a job, he needs more income from the portfolio now. So perhaps you have to, let's say, go to a more aggressive kind of investment, more risky investment, right? And of course, you monitor, you know, some market factors. Are the market changing? Is it a downturn, or maybe it's uptick, right? So you monitor all this, and then you go back to your planning phase. You reach out to your client, and then you talk about how to restructure a portfolio, or you recommend to him whether he wants certain changes to the portfolio, right? And any questions for this part on just a general overview of the portfolio process, management process. Okay, so a question to all of you, right? Let's say I'm a client, and my objective for the portfolio is 5% return. What if my portfolio is getting 10% return, twice the amount? Is this a good thing or is it a bad thing? Okay, good. I see some people saying it's good. All right, it depends. Okay, so actually I think Jinjie, you got the right answer. Yes, okay. Some of you are talking about risk now. Yes, so I guess you all are quite familiar with the risk and return concept. So it is generally a bad thing, even though you say, oh, I'm getting more returns for my client, right? It's good, right? Yeah, fine, you're getting more returns. But what you're forgetting is that, first of all, you are a portfolio manager. And remember, in the planning phase, in this phase, planning phase, right? You already set up the goals, the objective, right? So if you're getting 10% return out instead of 5% return, yes, you're taking more risk. And which means what? You're taking risk that the client doesn't want. So it's actually bad. In fact, if you do that, and if you're a portfolio manager, you perhaps will get fired, right? Because you're not supposed to take so much risk. You're taking twice as much risk. So yes, it's a bad thing. So don't think like, oh, I'm doing better for my client, and then I'm proud, and I go tell my client I get 10% for you. In fact, he might even fire you. So something to take note of, huh? All right, so let's go into detail on the planning part. We're going each step. So planning, as I mentioned, I want to go line by line. But basically, planning is you think about the investor objective, what he wants, all right? And this now we mentioned, right, risk and return already. So if you are giving 10%, but he only wants 5%, you're taking on too much risk, right? Of course, there are various other issues, such as the limitation of the investor. There might be some constraints as well. And we'll go into detail in the later slides. And all these, right, all these objectives, which constraints, limitation, will all be in this statement called the investor policy statement. Basically, imagine it like a very thick document with all the details, and they use like very legal languages, and basically this IPS governs the entire portfolio management process, and whether what the portfolio manager can and cannot do, right? So it governs the decision-making process. Of course, just now we talked in the planning phase, there are slides, market expectation, we have some long run, we forecast the long run kind of expectations in the market, and then after that, we determine some asset allocation, how we're going to optimize our assets, right? Whether are we going to gold, are we going to equity? All right. Now, I'll move on to the execution phase. So for the execution phase, now what we're doing is we're constructing the portfolio. We put in the assets. So like a portfolio, imagine like a basket. So we're putting in all the assets in the portfolio like a basket. Of course, during the execution phase, we want to increase the speed. Everyone wants the portfolio to be formed quickly, right? But remember, when we buy but like investment instruments, right? Across like globally, it takes time. So for example, now, if you are in Singapore and you want to buy like an S&P 500 stock, so I believe some of you are already into investment. So if you want to buy S&P 500 stock, but you want to buy the actual stock from, let's say, the New York Stock Exchange, this will take time. It doesn't happen like instantly. So you want to maximize execution, right? But at the same time, you minimize costs. Let's say you're going to buy from the New York Stock Exchange, you're going to have a lot of FX, foreign currency kind of costs involved. You might even have to pay tax, etc. So these are some transaction costs and tax that is involved. These are the two kind of transaction costs, explicit and implicit costs, that we have to take into account as well. Right, so that's for execution. Now we move on to the feedback phase, where we monitor the portfolio, we check whether it meets the IPS, which is stated. So whether our investment objective has been achieved. Of course, if the asset price changed too dramatically, if any of you all are in the market now, you know that the stock price are going quite low. So if you change too dramatically, you will have to rebalance your portfolio. You have to change the composition of it, right? So at the same time, sometimes there might be temporary kind of changes to the portfolio, perhaps for certain reasons, right? Either market changes or maybe even the investor. He say like, oh, you know, this year I'm doing a big upgrade of my house. I need some additional cash. So you want to, let's say, increase the weight of portfolio in risky assets so that it gives you more returns that the investor can use for his house upgrade. So there might be some temporary changes as well along the way. Of course, the feedback phase is quite extensive, and that's actually the main job of portfolio manager. If any of you are planning to go into portfolio management, you spend a lot of time in the feedback phase where you actually evaluate the portfolio, right? What are the returns? You know, is it under or overperforming? And remember, when it's overperforming, it's not good, right? Whether how do you achieve the returns? Is it temporary in the sense of because the market is in your favor, you get this return, or is it something that is constant, right? So recall things like bonds. Bonds give you coupons, right? And these coupons are throughout the life of the bond. So those are very steady streams of income compared to more like equity based. Of course, then you do an appraisal of the manager's skill, and these are part of feedback. Now, there might be some changes in terms of the investment objective and constraints as well. For example, the death of a spouse might actually trigger the client to, let's say, shorten his investment horizon. And when you shorten an investment horizon, basically the risk that you can take is lesser. So imagine like if you're young now, let's say if you're 30 and you have the next, let's say 50 years at least to work and to generate income. And so your risk that you can take is higher, right? Because the next 50 years, a lot of things can change. You're getting income, so it's fine. But let's say something happens, you know, maybe you fall ill, and then the doctor says, oh, you only have like 10 years to live. And because of that, suddenly from 50 years, you drop to 10 years. And when you drop to 10 years, what will you do? You want to take out your money immediately, right? You want to straight away, let's say, use the money to travel, I don't know, to spend it. And so this might change your objective, right? And certain constraints. And of course, managers, there might be some short-term and long-term change expectation differences, and therefore you can do so-called like tactical asset allocation, basically to help you generate more returns in case you are like underperforming. All right. Now, last but not least, this is still under the feedback component. You just evaluate the portfolio, you see how is it doing, you appraise the quality, etc. Yeah. So nothing too complex. Any questions for this part before we move on investment types? No. I guess we are good. Okay. So now type of investment approach. So passive, active, and semi-active. So nowadays, right, there are a lot of robo investors. So I believe there are some of you all might even be already investing, but they're more like robo, right? Yes, correct, safe. So what happens is that it's a bit passive in the sense that everything is automated. Yes, you might have a portfolio manager, but this portfolio manager, right, manages like I don't know, thousands of clients, because basically the robot kind of already allocate the investment amount into the various baskets. So a portfolio manager just make sure, oh, everything is going, as in not even the investment, but just make sure that the system is going well, right? So these are more passive. And then active, of course, yeah, as you mentioned, the portfolio manager actively monitors change, etc., and semi-active, right? That means the middle, basically. So now passive is quite big. And in fact, it reduces the barrier to entry for a lot of people when entering into investments. All right. Okay. So now this is perhaps the crux of our discussion today, our lecture. So we'll really go in depth, right, into all these components. So this part here, these are very important. So whenever you see question on a case study, let's say on this IPS, right, you will have to ensure that you tackle every single component here. So this is a reference document. I guess it's an open book exam. So please make sure that you always tackle every single one. And for item 2, there are 2 parts. Always talk about willingness and ability. And let's see what does this mean. We'll go into detail. All right. I'll not go through this. You can just read it. Basically, just talking about the IPS statement. What does it mean? What does it do? Key elements. We'll not talk about this. Okay, so why is this important? First of all, right, anyone know what is KYC? Anyone working in a bank? Yeah, okay. Yeah, know your client. Yeah, okay. Some of your perhaps working in a bank or that kind of line. So yes, KYC basically to know your client. So you have the client profile. You through the profile, usually it's like a survey, right? Even like if you do the passive investment, like SAFE, they'll ask you like, oh, what's your risk tolerance? What is your time horizon? But they don't structure it that way. They put it in a more simple way, right? They ask you, oh, what kind of return do you expect and stuff? So your objective, the kind of constraint. Are you still a student? Do you have a full-time income? So these are like some things that they might ask you. And this part of your KYC or know your customer. So this will help. After you know your customer, it helps you structure your decision-making process, your allocation, your benchmarking, etc. And then once you have the portfolio and you execute the portfolio, most of the time the portfolio will be in like so-called autopilot, right? Because investment takes time. And let's say your time horizon is 10 years. You're not going to check your portfolio every single day. Yes, you might if there is certain concerns, but you might just leave the portfolio there. That's what most of the time the portfolio manager does. But his job, remember, is also focused on giving feedback, right? So he has to maybe give monthly reporting or even yearly reporting to his customer. So that's what you will spend most of the time doing as a portfolio manager. You might sometimes have some rebalancing that's required due to market circumstances or customer circumstances. And of course, you need to make sure that you meet the regulations and legal compliance of certain things. We talk about trust later. And so, yeah, you of course protect your client. Okay. All right. So now we'll move on to the first component of the IPS. Remember, we have three main components and then we have sub-components, right? So the first component is the return objective. So this part is almost like a KYC. So there are various things to think about when we talk about return objective. First of all, we need to know whether the measure of your returns, what kind is it? Is it like based on total returns or is it the growth amount? Whether the measure of returns is absolute or relative, nominal or real, or pre and post tax. Anyone do you remember what's nominal and real returns? Yeah, nominal, real. So real is like yeah, GDP. Yeah, real takes into account inflation. Yeah, basically that's right. So we'll look at this equation. I believe you learned it in the first year called Fisher equation in a bit. Yeah. Okay, so we'll look at desired and required kind of return objective. So what you desire and actually what you require is different, right? Desire, it could be include secondary kind of like objective, but require is like you basically die have to have get this return. If not, you cannot survive. All right. Okay, so your return objective, you make sure you have to be smart, specific, measurable, achievable, and of course you need to take into account your top time horizon to achieve this target, right? Remember we talked about the shorter the time horizon, basically it increases the risk, right? Because you don't have too much time to get that return objective. Okay. All right, so types of return. This just now we talk about inflation and real. Basically, real meaning you take into account inflation. Nominal means that let's say you have $10 today. 5 years later, your $10 might worth less because of inflation, right? So that is a nominal part. But real means that you have to. Yeah. Okay. You have a question? I think Dennis. Oh, no. Okay. No, I guess. All right. Then, so real, basically you take into account the inflation, and then of course you need to take into account tax. So tax plays a big role in portfolio management. We'll see why later. All right. And are all of you all familiar with this Fisher equation? Or is this a new concept? New, okay. Actually, it's because I actually teach also the financial management. I think that's like the level 1 course. Maybe you're not studying too hard. Yeah, okay. Yeah. So it's a year 1 course. We talk about Fisher equation as well. Okay, so basically Fisher equation, right, helps you convert between nominal and real. So remember, right, when you want to convert the rates, nominal rate and real rate, you cannot just, let's say, nominal is 5% and inflation is 1%. So you cannot say, so I'm going right here, norm, let's say norm is 5%, inflate is 1%, right? So real, you cannot say it's just 5 plus 1. That's wrong. So remember, you have to always use this thing called the Fisher equation to get the real rate. So you plug in your I, the inflation amount, you plug in your nominal. So what I'm going to do here is 1 plus 5% equals to 1 plus real 1 plus 1%. So basically you solve this equation to get your real rate. All right. So remember, always use Fisher equation. Something that I'd like you all to highlight, so this also is in your, I guess, level 1 course, is that whenever we deal with nominal cash flow, of course, you use nominal rate. When you do with real cash flow or constant dollar cash flow, you use, if you do with actual dollars, you use nominal. If you're doing with constant dollar, you use real, right? Constant dollar means that you take into account inflation already. So you need to make sure you use the right rate. So there is one example here that we look at. So of course you do pre and post tax. So make sure you take into account tax. Okay. So there's one example here. So let's see. We have a real post tax. So it's real post tax requirement is this amount. You have a tax rate of this, inflation of this. So what is the nominal pre-tax requirement? Now, there are 2 methods depending on which one you take account first, whether you are going to do inflation first or are you going to do tax first, and both answers are correct, right? So let's say for this one, we want to take into account the tax rate first, right? So you do use the real rate, but then remember tax, right? So you need to adjust it to pre-tax. So this shouldn't be too unfamiliar. You just adjust it to pre-tax. Okay, and then now in order to convert the real to nominal, you notice this is Fisher equation, right? You all can see, right? So your real, so 1 plus norm equals to 1 plus the real, which is 12.7%. And then you just plus, what's the inflation? 5%. So 1 plus 0.05 here. Yeah. Sorry, this is no plus here. Yeah. So this is how you get your nominal, which is this amount. And yeah. So the second method is to do your conversion from real to nominal first. So the same thing, you do use your Fisher equation here, and then after that you take into account your so-called pre-tax, or you convert it back to pre-tax returns. All good? Right? Yes, for everyone, it's good. Now we have one more question on this return objective. As I mentioned, questions are quite lengthy, so let's quickly look at this question. So you have this person who is a president of this company. She's 58 years old. She has no immediate family. So all these things are things you need to take note of. You will see why in a bit. She expects to retire at this age. She has a base salary of this, which support her present lifestyle. That's quite a lot, but let me say she has a quite expensive lifestyle, right? She has 2 million in saving from the prior year, and she believes she can invest it for an after-tax real total return of this. Please take note, right? It's real, but can you see that your savings here, is it a constant dollar, or is it a so-called actual cash flow? I hope you can see that it's not constant dollar, so you need to convert your rates. So remember, real is only used for constant dollar. All right. Okay, so she expects to sell the stock for 10 million upon retirement. They tell you the inflation is this, tax rate of 35 on all salaries. And they ask you, what is the annual after-tax real return requirements during her retirement? All right, so I guess the good thing is you have all the answers here. So first of all, right, remember just now I told you that real rate, you have to use constant dollar, but this we are talking about nominal. So you have to convert your real to nominal. And what you do is basically you convert it using a Fisher equation. All right, and please take note that this is post-tax, so you don't have to take account tax again. So please read the question very carefully, whether it's post or pre-tax. Okay, so you know the number of years left is 7 years. So she just now mentioned that she has 2 million savings, right? 2 million. Hope you all still remember time value of money. You know, you want to compound it by 7 years, all right, to find what's her saving at the end when she finally retire, all right? And then you know that this is the amount she has, plus what is this? She's going to sell I think her investments or stocks. She's going to sell her stocks, right, for 10 million. So when she sell her stock, remember, when she sell, this would be tax as well. So you need to take account tax here. All right. I'm going to flip back to the other page. They say, you see tax rate to all salaries, investment income, and realized capital gain. So all these will all be taxed. Okay. At the same time, you know, her annual spending at the age of 65 would be, you know, you have to compound it by the inflation, right? Because basically your spending decrease is being eaten up by inflation, and also tax, because whatever she earns will be taxed. So you get this amount. All right. And what you do, you simply just take the amount that she would spend at 65 divided by what's your total assets amount that you have, right? Which is this one here. And therefore you should get, this will give you your after-tax return requirements during retirement. So what's the return you require? Because remember, at age 65, your spending will be this amount, and at the same time, this is the called lump sum money you have. So what is that? And this lump sum money is after tax, right? Because you take into account all this. So yeah. So do you notice the savings you did not include tax again? Because this amount it's already post-tax. Right. Any questions for this example? No. Okay, we're good. Okay, very good then. So that's more of the quantitative side of return objective, and that's one example of how it can be tested. Is it assumed it is not in SG? What do you mean assume not in SG? See. Okay. Yeah, I guess you can say that is assumed, yeah, not to be in SG. Let's see. Is there any example that says, yeah, I guess you can assume that it's not in SG. But luckily, this is not so critical because this question is purely on calculation. We'll look at two more case studies where you see that the jurisdiction is different, and that's where it becomes important to take account. But we are very sharp, that's good, that this might not be in SG. Right? I think later we'll look at two examples that are in UK. But yes, so there's something that you have to always consider which jurisdiction it is. We'll look at why later. All right. So in terms of objective returns, return objective, there's required or desired. Required is what you so-called die have to have it. Desired is like, okay, maybe you can have it. It's good to have it. This might include your secondary kind of goals, right? So example of secondary goals, for example, your required is like, oh, you need this money for your daily life, for buying groceries, you need it for transportation, to pay your mortgage. These are required. Desired could be like, oh, you need this return for upgrading of the house, or you want to buy a new car, but these are not really required, right? You already have a car, or you have a house where you just want to upgrade it. So you need to, when the client comes to you, and you're a portfolio manager, you have to say, oh, what is your required, what's your desired? And those two are very different. All right. Okay, as usual, I'll not go through everything like what I mentioned. It's more of, I'm just trying to teach you like the intuition, and then these are the details of it. All right. So yeah, okay. So let's say, right, if the client say, oh, the house is required, maybe because, okay, they have let's say they have a bungalow, and then the bungalow is leaking, or the floor is chipped off, or there is, I don't know, a fire in the kitchen, and then now need some upgrade, then okay, now there's no choice, right? You have to provide that. You have to put it as required. But remember, you are almost like a client advisor, right? So if any of you are in insurance line, and if you ever deal with high net worth clients, so these are something that you need to consider as well. You need to ask the client, right? Okay, yeah, so you require this upgrading, but why? You need to find out more. You need to be a bit more inquisitive. So yeah, it could be required as well. All right, so let's see. This is something that we talked about earlier, whether the amount of returns you're generating above the required, or the amount stated in the IPS, is it good or bad? So always remember, you're taking more risk if you're generating higher, right? So I'll not repeat again. Now, just now remember when we talk about risk objective, we say about whether it's absolute or relative, right? Because your objective can be relative to something. So what does relative mean? So for example, the objective can be, say, I want to achieve returns within the S&P 500 returns approximately 95% of the time. So this is something that you write in the IPS, and is specified or agreed upon by the client and yourself as a portfolio manager, right? So it's relative. So of course, if the S&P 500 returns is going down like what's happening now, then it's okay for a portfolio to go down. And usually it's a relative form. Most portfolio construction is based on relative kind of risk objective, right? Because absolute objective can be very strict. For example, if the economy is going down, and then the client say, "Oh, I still expect 10% return," most likely you will not achieve it, right? So this is an example of absolute. For 12 months, the 12 months 95% value at risk. So hope you all know what's value at risk, must not be more than 1 billion. So value at risk is basically the concept where how much of the portfolio would so-called disappear or like go down the drain if something happened. So what value of the portfolio is at risk? So obviously, we think this investment is very big, so they don't want it more than 1 billion, and this yen. So yen when you convert to US is different, US dollar. All right, so absolute and relative. So next, okay, so now we are talking about risk tolerance, right? So this is the second component. So just now we talk about the objective, right? Return objective. So what I have given you, right? All these absolute, relative, all these detail, desired, required, are basically like ingredients for you to think about when you read a case study. So a case study can be very indirect. They will not say like, oh, the client want this. They might tell you a long story, blah, blah, blah. And how you actually utilize these notes is to think about what the case study is saying. Oh, are they referring to a relative, or are they referring to absolute kind of objective? And what are the pros and cons? What are the benefits? Or maybe are they saying that it is more of a desired return rather than a required return? So basically, what I'm giving you is ingredients for you to detect certain wording, certain phrasing to help you craft the IPS. Because remember, the client, right, might not be financially so-called financially equipped to answer your question directly. So they might go beat round the bush, they talk about a lot of things. And as a portfolio manager, you're supposed to detect certain characteristics, certain words they use, and from there, kind of craft out the IPS, right? So your portfolio manager can be like a scientist. He doesn't know anything about finance, but he knows like, oh, I want this, I want that, I want this. And so as a portfolio manager, you're supposed to sift through everything and detect what the client wants. And so this is basically how you might be tested as well in exam, in a case study form. All right, any questions about this? Okay, if not, then we'll go on to risk. So when we talk about risk, just now earlier in the slides, I mentioned the two components, ability and willingness, right? And we'll look at a metrics to understand more. So when we talk about willingness, we need to analyze the client's personality, self-esteem, so a lot of behavioral factors, right? Now, when we talk about ability, this is more like facts. Oh, how much money you have? What's your time horizon? Are you going to die soon, right? What's your expected income? What's your wealth and liabilities? So willingness can be very behavioral, and we'll look at some examples. And ability is very hard facts. And both of it contribute to your risk tolerance. So there are two factors contributing to risk tolerance. So let's look at these metrics here. And this will help you identify what kind of risk tolerance your client is. All right. So I want to highlight to you this part, which is very important. So it says that whenever there is a mismatch between ability and willingness, as a portfolio manager, always go to the lower end, meaning that treat it as a low risk tolerance. Don't be too like in Singapore, say, don't be too garang, right? Don't be too ambitious. Oh, even though it's low, you want to put it as high risk tolerance, because then there's a mismatch and there'll be issues, right? So for example, if you have below average ability, but you have your your willingness below average is quite easy to understand, then you have below average, right? If your ability is above average, and your willingness above average, is quite common, because there's no incongruence in terms of ability and willingness. Now, the issue comes in when your willingness is above average, but your ability is below average. So as a portfolio manager, be more conservative. Just say that, oh, so your risk tolerance is actually below average, right? Even though the client's willingness might be above average. So go below average. Now, where education of the investment comes in as a portfolio manager to your client is when you realize that your ability of the client is above average. So the client can take on a lot of risk, but maybe he is below average in terms of willingness. And we look at some examples why this could be the case. Now, this becomes your job now to educate the client. Oh, explain to him why his ability might be high and what can be done, right? And then, of course, at the end of the day, both of you have to decide together, right? So you can't force your client to say, oh, your ability is high, your risk tolerance is high, so that's all. And you invest in, let's say, equity, which is very high risk. So you can't do that. So you come to a compromise with your client, explain to him, educate him about investment. All right. So I want to highlight to you, this is very important, these metrics. So always refer back to these metrics whenever you tackle case study questions to determine what's your risk tolerance. Right? Okay, so we first look in detail about the willingness component, right? Willingness. So willingness, remember I mentioned earlier, that is very behavioral, right? So it's about personality types. So you do interviews, you do questionnaires, right? To determine what is the client's willingness, right? So questionnaires can be very indirect as well. All right, then we need to determine some behavioral kind of factors, personality, psychological considerations. Have anyone of yours seen these behavioral biases? And you've taken some kind of behavioral finance course previously, or are all these quite new? Oh, no, quite new. Okay. Oh wow. Okay. I thought usually they might have a behavioral finance course. Okay, so maybe no. Yeah. Okay, then I'll go into detail then. Of course, these are some issues that you need to pick up in the case study. Right. So let's talk about some of these behavioral biases, and these relate more to investments. Okay, loss aversion. So loss aversion happens, right? How you just think about it is that, look at the last sentence here. Most people prefer uncertain loss to certain loss. So if you die know that you're going to lose money, you don't like that. You prefer to be like, oh, you 50% might lose money, right? But so this is about loss. But if it's about gain, people want a certain gain. You want 100% gain compared to 50% gain. And can you see that there's a mismatch? Why for loss you prefer uncertain? Why for gain you prefer certain? Maybe for you it's like, oh, it's quite common sense, right? You want more money, right? And you don't want to lose money. But this is a bias, right? You're biased towards gain, and you're so-called negatively biased towards loss, right? So this is a so-called incongruence in terms of the human behavior. So it's something that actually, you know what, the individual might be more distressed at this loss. So if your client, you notice that, hey, maybe he has loss aversion, then you might want to be more conservative in terms of your investments, because he's very afraid of loss. But some people are not like that. Maybe they are very adventurous, they're entrepreneur, they don't mind taking losses. Then maybe he doesn't exhibit loss aversion. All right. Now, buyer's expectation. So maybe the client's like, he's very confident. He say like, oh, I'm sure the market will do very well, right? But as a portfolio manager, you notice that actually, you know what? The US market is not doing too well already. There are some recession happening, and you feel that maybe the British or UK or London market might go down as well. So because the client, let's say, is in Singapore, he only knows about the Singapore exchange SGX. He might not have the full view, right? So he might have a very biased kind of expectation. So as a portfolio manager, you're supposed to identify this and let him know that, hey, you know what? Actually, I noticed this trend, blah, 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 in the US and the UK, and therefore it's something you should be aware of, right? Now, asset segregation, what does this mean? It means that he evaluate the investments based on individual assets. Like, for example, I like Facebook stock, or now not Facebook, now it's called Meta, right? He likes tech stocks. And so he just evaluate, tech stock is doing very well, right? But remember, we are a portfolio manager. You don't only buy one stock. If you want to buy one stock, you just go to the market and buy it. You don't need a portfolio manager to do that. So because you're a portfolio manager and most likely your client has other kind of investment products, right? That's where you need to have a broad view of the investment. So you tell him, yes, okay, you like Meta, right? And the returns are very good, but perhaps you need to balance the risk by putting some of your money into fixed deposit, let's say, right? So that it's not too risky. And so you have like a so-called a good base for your investments. So this is one of the biases that the client might have. Now, we have the reference dependence. So basically, it's about the reference or context of choice that's presented. So reference dependence could be due to, let's say, if the client worked in a bank, right? And so he might have a positive outlook of the banking industry, regardless of whether it's real or fake, right? Because he's like, I'm in the bank, it must be always doing well, right? And he has a positive bias towards the industry. So as a portfolio manager, you perhaps have to tell a client, you know what? Yes, you're in a bank. In fact, you should actually diversify. So I hope this word diversify is not new, where if you are working in the bank already, then you shouldn't even invest in the banking stocks in the first place, because if the banking industry go down, maybe you lose your income, and then your investments will go down, you lose your investments, right? So maybe you should invest in manufacturing, right? So you balance the industry out, right? So this reference dependence, mental accounting. So this is where the clients kind of treat the various accounts separately. So for example, you have stocks, you have bonds, you have let's say property. So when the property go down, but the stocks go up and the bonds go up, he's very he goes into distress because the property goes down, because he only look at like individual categories. You don't consider it as a whole, right? As a whole investment portfolio. So yeah. So this is mental accounting. Any questions? All right, no. Okay, let me see how many more. Okay, we'll do one more slide and we'll take a short break. So for willingness, this is an important identification. So whenever you see you meet a client or you see a case study, always determine whether the client or investor might be a self-made investor or passive investor. So what's self-made? So self-made is like an entrepreneur. He earned the money and he's willing to take the risk, right? So these people usually has very high confidence of themselves. They are risk takers. They have high willingness to take risk. But at the same time, they might be very reluctant to give control to a third party. So basically, you have to win his trust, right? He might be very unwilling, like, oh, I so-called, let's say I'm an entrepreneur, I have like a $5 million business. Like, why should I trust you as a portfolio manager to manage my money, right? So you have to win the trust of the customer. If you identify him as a self-made investor, right? Well, if it's a passive recipient, so passive person means that you receive the money, let's say it's inheritance. You got the money through your parents. You might not be very financially equipped with the knowledge because you just get the money. And so this kind of investor could actually have very low risk tolerance. So they are very afraid of risk, right? So this category would fall into loss aversion. So he might have some loss aversion. So you should make sure that you invest in something less risky for him. All right. Of course, your investor perception as well, how he perceive his holdings, right? Whether he think that he has a lot of money or less money, and of course, based on the actual dollars, right? For example, he feel that he's very rich, but actually he's not very rich. So you need to educate your client whether on the proper way to take on risk. All right. Okay, so maybe we'll pause here for a quick, like let's say 7 minutes break. We'll take 2 breaks in between so that y'all can do a bit of stretching, relax a little. Maybe we'll come back at, let's say, 7:08. Yeah. Of course, if you have any questions regarding whatever we covered so far, just type in a group chat. And yeah, we'll come back at 7:08. Oh, all right. Welcome back. Hope you all have a quick break, quick coffee break, toilet break. Yeah, good that I see some of you are looking for groups. So that's good. All right, shall we continue? So now let's move on. So just now we talk about risk willingness, right? Risk tolerance willingness. So now we'll look at the ability part of the risk tolerance component. So just now when we talk about willingness, we mentioned that it's quite behavioral based, right? So we did mention a few biases, etc. Now for ability, this can be quite fixed. So whether you have money or not, right? In layman terms, whether you got money or not, this will determine your ability. Of course, it's not only that. So let's look at why. So whether you have money or not, or whether you have money, basically, yes, can determine your ability, but we also need to look at, let's say, the investor lifestyle, right? How is he actually, how much is he spending per month or per year, right? Is it a very lavish lifestyle, or is it very modest kind of lifestyle? So we need to determine the lifestyle or what kind of choices he make for food. Let's say, does he eat out all the time, or he cooks most of the time, right? We also need to think into account, how much of the portfolio does he want to pass on? So we talk about succession. So how much does he want to pass on to his next, his kids or next generation, right? And we have some estate planning. So estate planning is almost like how are you going to pass down the your property, right? So this is quite interesting because when you pass down a property, you shouldn't, or there are many ways to pass down a property. It's not just, oh, you just give it to your kid or you put right in the will, right? So later we'll look at it. There are various ways, and the ways to pass down a property can actually influence a lot of factors, right? Mostly tax kind of factors. So we'll have a look at it in a bit. This is why I like this module, because I feel that it is quite applicable even to your life. Let's say you're never going to be a portfolio manager, but it's something that you can think about when you invest in your own money, let's say in a portfolio, or even when you have a property, what do you do after that? All right. So risk tolerance ability, just like I mentioned, that it will determine on the time horizon. So basically, if you know you're going to live for the next 50 years, right? You can actually take on more risk. You can go on to buy, very risky asset. You buy like SME kind of assets, small cap companies, right? Because you have a 50 years time horizon to, let's say, even out the fluctuations or volatility in your investments, right? So that's fine. But if you know that you only have 5 years, then your ability would change already. All right. So when we talk about ability, we need to look at which stage in life are you in. So this is a very typical kind of like case study way of asking you. So they don't say, oh, let's say so and so is in this stage of life. They don't tell you that. But what they tell you is that, oh, he is a fresh graduate, or maybe he just entered the workforce, or let's say he's about to retire. So when you have these kind of words, right, you need to identify when you answer the case study, right? Oh, am I in the foundation? Am I accumulation, maintenance, and distribution? So you need to identify which phase is it. And for you to identify, I have provided you some examples of what does a foundation phase means, etc. So let's look at it. So foundation phase means that, oh, this individual is establishing his base, wealth, he's probably very young, a long time horizon. For example, you just entered the workforce, right? He actually has above average risk tolerance, right? Because he has a long time horizon. But actually, most of the time, he might not be able to assume too much risk because maybe he do not have the ability, he do not have the so-called capital to do it, right? At the same time, because he's in this foundational phase, he can actually take on financial assets that are more risky and more uncertainty. So this is the foundation phase. So whenever you read a case study question, try to think about it, like which stage of life is he in, and then determine his risk tolerance ability. Now, for accumulation phase, usually this phase is where you're in like your mid-career. Let's say you have worked for 5 years, 6 years, right? And then you start thinking about like family, you start thinking about buying a house, you buy a car, etc. So in this stage of life, yes, your income is increasing, you're earning more, you get a promotion, and then your skill set increase as well, you're more valuable. So remember, always think about human capital, right? So your human capital is increasing, you're becoming more, I guess, wealthy, monetarily and non-monetarily, right? At the same time, your expenses might be increasing because you have a family, you want to purchase a house, you have education, you have insurance plan. So all these things would impact the expenses. So yes, your income increase, your expense also increase. So this is something you need to think about. And of course, as your kids grow older, you need to plan for their education, right? So even for most of yourself, whether are you going to take a bank loan to pay your degree, or is your parents actually paying for it? And if your parents are paying for it, then you must think about it. So it means your parents had to plan ahead and start saving for education. And are you going to do that for your kids? So these are things that you need to think about when we are in the accumulation phase, right? So because of that, if the person is in the accumulation phase, you need to ask him these kind of questions. And if he needs to plan ahead for his kids, you want something that maybe is less risky, something that gives you perpetual income, like your bond or perpetuals, right? Yeah. So what I'd like to highlight here is that accumulation phase is characterized by increasing risk tolerance because you earn more due to increasing wealth, and of course you do have a long time horizon. Okay, so we go on to maintenance. Maintenance is usually when the individual retires. So maybe some of your parents might already be retired, right? And you focus on just maintaining your desired lifestyle, right? And financial security. So the aim now is to preserve your wealth. When we talk about wealth preservation, we need to think not only about just getting money, right? We need to think about, what will happen after, let's say, you pass away, even though it goes on to the next stage in life. But in the maintenance phase, usually your risk tolerance will become lower. You just want to make sure that the amount you have will be enough for your daily spending, monthly spending. And yeah, so you want to make sure your asset, the risk of your asset is will help you preserve your ability to buy things or to survive on a daily basis. All right. Okay, I'll go on to next one and then we'll see whether there's any questions. Now for distribution phase, this is where you are, let's say you have 5 more years to live, right? So you have accumulated all your wealth, and now what you have to do is how are you going to transfer your wealth, right? Maybe nowadays is something that we think about more, but like our parents' age or even your parents' age, they don't really think about wealth transfer, right? So at the end of the day, when they do pass away, it gets very difficult, it gets very complex, right? You have family conflict, like who's going to take the house and blah, blah, blah. Like, what happened to a bank account, especially when someone passed away, if he doesn't transfer money out of the bank account, it's very difficult to get the money out. You need to prove, you need to show a death cert, you need to, who's the next of kin, blah, blah, blah. So you need to plan about distribution as well, right? So think about your tax implication of the assets, right? Let's say, I'll give you a good case example, right? So this is very practical, in a very practical sense, or you can even do it for your own planning. Let's say you get a house, you're living in a HDB, right? And then the thing is, you are at a certain age, you're going to pass away, right? And you have 2 kids. What should you do with the house? Do you split the house? Or do you transfer the house to your 2 kids? you can unmute yourself, you can suggest, there's no right or wrong, right? Or you can just type. So what should you do with your house before you pass away? So I'll repeat the question again. Let's say you are at a certain age, you have a property, a house, a HDB, and you want to pass it to your kids, but you have two kids. So how? Are you going to split 50? Okay, somebody say split 50-50, but how am I going to split? So what? Let's say you have a son and a daughter. So the daughter stay half the house, the son stay half the house. So so somebody's going to be biased now. Whoever I like more will get it. Cash out and distribute. Yeah, but okay. So okay, I see some answers already. So you cash out, but you're not dead yet. You still need the house, right? You still need a roof over your head. So how are you going to sell? You can't sell the house immediately. Okay, yeah. So rent it out, good. Write a will. Yes, but write a will. The will only says who gets the house. It doesn't say what happens to the house, right? So yes, I see some answers here and there. Good that you're thinking about this, renting out, write the will, split. Okay, so splitting the house is the worst example. I say worst option. First of all, a house is very fixed, right? It's impossible. Let's say you have a son and a daughter. You cannot say I split the kitchen into half, the toilet into half, right? Each one take one. So what happens most of the time, right? At the moment, let's say for our parents and all, what happens to the house is that they give the house to both kids. But what the kids would do is that they would sell the house and get the proceeds from the house. But what happened is that when you pass away, and then you get as you inherit the house, right? You want to sell it away. Most likely, you'll sell the house at a fire sales or not the best price, right? So because of that, your kids that are getting the so-called the money from the house will get quite little amount. And then of course you have tax implications and all, right? And so it's not a very good option, which is not what most people think about. They just say, oh, at least I give you a house, you have a roof over your head. But when you have two kids, yeah, it doesn't make sense. Okay, some people mention about rental. Rental might not be good too, right? Let's say if it's the location of the house is not so good, the rental market might not be in favor of you renting a house, right? Not only that, but sometimes, not in Singapore, but in the UK, what happens is that when you inherit a property, you have to pay inheritance tax. So inheritance tax, right? Let's say your house worth 1 million in the UK, 1 million pounds. When you're inheriting the house, what happens is that you have to pay the tax to the government for inheriting this house. And the tax, right, can be a lot. In the sense, it can be, let's say, 100,000 pounds, let's just say. What if you don't have the money for that? Then you cannot inherit the house, right? So these are some things that we need to think about when we think about portfolio management for a client, right? So somebody mentioned trust. Yeah, I guess if you usually form a trust when you are very big, you're like you have a lot of properties everywhere. So yeah, you do form a trust. So usually what people do is that you try to obviously you can't sell the house, but what you can do is you can give the house to one kid. Okay, so just now I mentioned you have two kids, right? So give the house to one kid, so the kid has the whole house, right? Not because you are in favor of the kid, right? So don't do that. If not, they'll fight. And you give another investment to the other kid of equal value. So let's say you have a portfolio of stocks and you have a house. So rather than splitting the house and splitting the investment, you give the house to one kid and give the investment to the other kid. So both of them have obvious, you can't be really equal value, but you try to have equal value, right? And then you settle this issue. So for example, that kid that got the house, maybe he wants to stay there, he can do whatever with the house, who cares, right? He's not going to fight with his siblings on splitting the house into 50-50, right? And then the other kid has the investment. So I guess at the end of the day, why I ask this question is that, let's say if you're planning for the future, right, and you have kids already, some of y'all might have already have kids, maybe young kids, you want to think about having maybe at least two investment portfolios. Yes, obviously most of y'all will have a house, right? But instead of just having a house, try to accumulate, let's say, investment in another item. So eventually, if you have two kids, you can actually split your investment, one to the house to one kid and the investment to the other kid. Yeah. So this is usually what's the best way to do it. And of course, we're not talking about like, oh, you have like 5 or 10 properties, right? We're just talking about one property and how you can handle this issue. All right. And any questions for this? I mean, I feel it's very applicable to daily life. Oh, something about rental, right? Is that also a real life example? Is that yes, you can give the house to both kids and they both rent it out. Now the issue comes, right, when one kid needs the money, he wants to sell the house, but the other kid doesn't want to sell. That's where a lot of family conflicts happen. So it's like, oh wow, they don't want the rent anymore. They need the cash, the lump sum, but the other one wants the steady income. So you see, you have a lot of conflicts, right, that can actually arise. So remember, a will is not enough. A will only determines who gets what, but you need to have proper financial planning, right? Which is the reason why perhaps you take this course, right? So you know what you should do when you have certain kind of assets. All right. Okay, so that's a small kind of like real life case study, but let's move on to risk tolerance ability. So just this to mention that the various space is non-linear. You can go depending on the kind of where you are in life, right? Whether let's say you suddenly fall ill, things might change. So remember, when you are a portfolio manager, part of your job scope is to know what the client is doing or what's happening to the client. So basically, you are supposed to be very close to your client. You know about his daily life, his personal circumstances. So these are important things that you need to build when you're a portfolio manager with your client, right? So these are things that you need to think about. Okay, so now we move on to your investment constraints. And for investment constraints, we have multiple factors. I think there are 5 or 6, I can't remember. We'll cover each of them along the way. So first of all, we talk about liquidity. So this liquidity would constrain the kind of investment you can do. All right. So let's say your liquidity, let's say you have ongoing expenses and your kind of like daily expenses is very high. If your daily expenses is very high, means that your investments, your portfolio manager should invest in something that gives you high liquidity, that gives you regular income. So this one thing to think about, right? Do you need an emergency reserve? So whenever you read a case study, think about it. Oh, is this person old? Maybe he's ill, or he's 65 years old, right? So let's say if the question says he's 65 years old already, most likely he will need some kind of emergency reserve, right? Because as you grow older, the chances of being sick is higher, right? So yeah, so this is something you think about. So if you need an emergency reserve, then maybe you need more liquidity. Do you have any negative liquidity event? This could include, a sudden need for cash. Let's say you have a kid and your kid is going to university. And university is not cheap, right? Perhaps you should plan in a situation that he does not get a scholarship, so you have to pay cash out upfront, right? And so you might have a negative liquidity event. And so this is something you need to consider. All right. And so And so you can evaluate, what kind of liquidity your client is requiring, and from there, what kind of assets to invest in, right? If you need a high liquidity kind of assets, you want to avoid things that require high transaction costs and takes a long time. Maybe you shouldn't buy like a stock, let's say far away, like say Germany, because it's like, the time difference and all, it's very difficult to sell the stock, etc. Right? Okay. So these are some factors I want to highlight to you to consider for your reading as well. The level of cash that's needed at one point, are there any anticipated or unanticipated kind of liquidity requirements? Is it recurring or one-off? So for example, just now we mentioned about the house renovation. This might be one-off, right? So it's a one-off thing. Or is it recurring? That means every year, for example, here in Canada, it snows every year. So every year, during winter, you will have to, let's say, get a snow remover, right, to remove the snow. But you don't buy a snow remover because you only need it during winter, right? So because of that, every year on a recurring basis, you have to have this snow remover, which might be a lump sum amount for like 5 months, right? So these are recurring kind of issues that you need to take into account. Constraints, whether the portfolio can take on more risk, because higher risk, higher return, then therefore you have more liquidity. But at the same time, maybe the client doesn't want so much risk, so you can't take on that amount. All right. Of course, type of liquidity will depend on the type of assets that you use. Bonds will give regular income, as you know. Stocks give dividends, but dividends are subjective, right? How much dividends you get is depends on the profitability of the company. All right, further considerations, we need to think about transaction costs. Just now, remember we mentioned implicit, explicit kind of transaction costs. Now, price volatility as well. So if any of y'all entered the market in stocks, let's say last year, maybe early last year, or even the year before, meaning 2019, the stock market was doing very well, right? But if you enter the market during that time, and if you hold the stock till now, you realize your stock value will have dropped quite a bit, right? So what happens is that when you enter at a high level, and then now it's so low, you realize that you cannot actually sell the stock. You can, but you will realize the losses, right? So a natural investor will not want to realize the losses. And therefore, the price volatility might actually impede your liquidity of your investments. So this is something that you need to think about. So if the price go too low, you're actually forced not to sell, or you don't want to realize your losses, right? Now, there's quite a bit on liquidity. So liquidity requirement, whether there's any short-term needs. Okay, so this about primary residences, going back to the house example. So the thing about a house, right, is that a house is very illiquid. So in Singapore, okay, this is a bit counterintuitive. A lot of people think that, you know what, I should buy a house for investment purpose, or maybe even you might be a property agent. I'm not sure if any of you are property agent here. You might actually tell a client, hey, you know what, you should buy a private property for investment purpose. Now, what I'd like to tell you is that, yes, buying a property is good, but the problem with a property, right, is that it is extremely illiquid. So it's one of the most illiquid assets that is the market. And because the cost of the property is so high, unless you are like unless you're really rich, that the percentage of the purchase cost of the property is just like, let's say, if you're rich, maybe the purchase cost is like 10% of your total portfolio, then it's fine, right? But for most of us, maybe the property is 30% or 40% of our total so-called accumulated wealth. If 30% of our accumulated wealth is so illiquid, what happens is that if you need the money, what can you do? It's very difficult to sell a property, as you know. And there's so many regulations, change in regulations, you engage a property agent, blah, blah, blah. So buying a property for investments usually is a lot of people have this misconception that it's a good thing, but actually it's not, because it's very illiquid. Yes, the prices might increase, but it is so illiquid that perhaps it's not a good option if it constitutes a large proportion of your accumulated wealth, right? So that's the caveat, if it's a large proportion of accumulated wealth. So yeah, maybe you should invest in stocks or bonds instead. Anyone have any opinions about this, about property, investing in property, or if you're a property agent, maybe you can correct me. Buy REITs. Okay, yeah, that's a good option. Buying REITs. So all of y'all know what is REITs? Yeah, so REITs are real estate investment trusts. Yeah, so they are basically a combination of properties in a trust structure, and then you buy into the trust and you get like dividends from it. And that's a great idea. Yeah. So in case there's any case study, they talk about property, right? You can always suggest REITs. REITs are a very good option to buy. Yeah. So yeah, for your own personal investment, try not to buy a property for investment. Go into REITs. That's a better option. No, I think HDB, unless it's your primary residence, no, it's not so good. If you want to buy for investment purpose, I think what your friend mentioned, go into REITs. That's better. Yeah. If it's your primary residence, you have to stay there. Then yeah, no choice like you have to stay there, right? So go into it. But if it's purely for investment, my personal opinion is that it's not so. Yeah. So yeah, buy and rent. That's a good. You can actually do that, but what happens is that you need to take into account that for HDB, you cannot rent out immediately, right? You have to stay for X number of years. I can't remember, 5 years or 8 years or something. Not only that, but there's a lot to do when you rent, meaning that there are a lot of costs that you do not take into account. For example, repair costs, because whenever you change so-called the rentee, the person who rent your house, you have to do repairs and stuff. Tenants, yeah. Do not take care of the rental. Yes, yeah, that's true. Yeah, precisely. So do not take care. So you need to do a so-called repair costs that you might not even factor in. Not only that, but the rent amount that you get might not be very attractive compared to the mortgage that you have to pay. Remember, you have to pay a mortgage, right? So you might actually only break even. So that means you're not earning a profit, you might break even. Some people might say, oh, you know what, I break even, at least I still have a property for investment, right? I can still sell it for capital gains. Well, if you want to sell it for capital gains, then you might as well just buy a REITs, right? The REITs, you can get dividends and you maybe even get capital gains. I don't know. Yeah, depending on market. So isn't that a better option? Like what friend of yours mentioned? So yeah, so you need to take in consideration those as well. Okay. So I hope I'm stimulating some thoughts in your mind so that when you think about investment, you don't just think, oh, you just invest and then that's all, right? You think about the implications, whether it's illiquid, etc. All right. Okay, so maybe we'll just move on a little on time horizon. So this is a period of time where you can meet your investment objective. Basically, the longer the time horizon, the ability to take on, you have greater ability to take on more risk, right? So, of course, a longer time horizon, you should be concerned about inflation as well, because inflation usually is a long-term concept, right? So if your time horizon is 10 years, you need to take into account inflation in your investment objective. Okay. Now this concept of multi-stage horizon is very common nowadays. What happens is that you have an investment, and the thing is you have both short-term and long-term requirements. So for example, a short-term requirement could be, oh, you need to provide for your kids' education, right? You have a kid now. But at the same time, you also want to retire in, let's say, 5 years' time. So you need to take into account multiple levels of so-called time horizon. And what does this mean? It means that you should have various categories of assets in order to take into account this different time horizon when as a portfolio manager. So when you notice this, you need to think about, oh, maybe I should have this asset to cater for short term and this asset for long term, right? Now, tax, one of the more interesting topics, because at the end of the day, nobody wants to pay tax, right? You obviously you shouldn't evade tax, but people want to avoid as much tax as possible. So I believe most of you are already working. So whenever you get your income tax statement, I think in March, which is quite soon, you'll be like, oh, I have to pay don't know how much out, and then you could use the money for something else, but no choice, you have to pay income tax. So in terms of tax, we need to look at jurisdiction. Just now we mentioned earlier, what's a tax jurisdiction? Somebody mentioned about offshore trust. So trust is a very good structure. I would say if you have accumulated a good amount of wealth, a trust is a very good structure. We can talk a bit on that later. Estate tax, remember about estate tax is that when, just now I mentioned, right? Let's say in the UK, when you pass away, you have inheritance of property, you will have to pay inheritance tax on the property, and this amount can be very big. So this is something you need to consider before you so-called kick the bucket or you pass away, right? So think about estate tax, because if it's so high, maybe your kids will not even have the money to pay for the tax in order to get the property. So you need to think about this, right, before you just give the property to someone or to your kids. All right, so I will not go through this. I think these are income tax is quite common. Capital tax, I think all y'all should know. Okay, wealth transfer tax is the estate or inheritance tax that I talked about earlier. Now, one way to so-called escape this wealth transfer tax, right? So you need to look at the jurisdiction. I know in certain countries, like in Mexico, if you give the estate to someone, that means you need to, I mean, there's some legal procedures, but you're gifting, right? You can actually escape the escape inheritance tax. So what happens is that you have a kid, you give it to the kid, so it is like a gift. There's no tax on it. But if you are going to write it in a will, and after you pass away, the kid get your property, then you have to pay inheritance tax. So something you need to look at when you think about tax. All right, property tax I'll not go through. All right, so there are various tax strategies. You can talk about deference, avoidance, and last but not least, reduction. Right. Okay, so deference, of course, is to defer the tax as long as possible. So basically, you postpone the amount of tax. Let's say if it's capital gain tax, you want to postpone it as long as possible. Avoidance, you can have various tax exempt kind of investments. I think the CPF, I believe the CPF, there's this special account where you can do investments in it. I believe that will not be taxed if I'm not wrong. I think I read somewhere. I'm not sure whether it's still applicable. If any of y'all know, you can just type it in. Check. Yeah, I think it's the SRS. Yes, the one that you invest. So those are like your tax exempt kind of like investments, right? Yeah, of course. But let's say if you invest in your special account in CPF, you diminish your control, right? I believe you cannot take out the money until you reach a certain age. So that's a real life example of this issue. Okay, so reduction, we can analyze, say, if the income tax exceeds the capital gain tax, so maybe the portfolio manager would, focus more on so-called the investments, the dividends, rather than when selling the investment, because your your portfolio manager should focus more on capital gains, because your income tax will exceed your capital gain tax. So loss harvesting. So this is a classic example. If any of you follow the US politics, Donald Trump kind of do a lot of tax harvesting, loss harvesting, where you recognize a loss in one of your investments, and the loss is so much so that when you recognize the loss, you get a deferred kind of tax. So this deferred tax would offset the let's say your income tax that you have, right? So this loss harvesting. So you recognize a large loss so that you can offset your actual tax that you have to pay. So it's a good strategy, right? So this is an example of gifting that you will reduce the tax of the inheritance tax. And I would like to highlight this thing called generation skipping. So this is a very important concept. What is generation skipping? So for example, you are now like 60 years old, right? You have a kid, and the kid has grandkids, right? So you know that every time you inherit something to your kid or whatever, you will have to pay inheritance tax. Now, as a portfolio manager, if you notice this, and then your client's like, oh, I want to reduce tax. So what do? You ask your client to give the asset to your grandkids instead of your kid. So what happens? You're actually skipping one generation. And some of you might say, oh, it's just one generation. But remember, your tax can be a lot. Let's say if you are gifting, or not gifting, but inheriting a large sum of money or a large property, let's say maybe 2 million, 3 million, or nowadays properties are very expensive. It goes all the way to 10 million, right? So if you skip one generation, basically you are avoiding, let's say, 20% of the tax, which is significant. So this idea is called generation skipping. So you skip one generation of inheritance tax. It's used very often to skip, to avoid tax. Right. Cause some other issues, we think about how stable the tax code is, the amount that you want to retain for your primary investor, meaning that if you are the one transferring the item, you want to make sure that obviously you have enough money for yourself. Of course, some unintended consequence of transferring large amount of money to children. One of I think your classmate mentioned trust. So the trust structure is beautiful. It's something you should look at. I think we'll look at this next. All right. So remember, at the end of the day, right, when we think about tax in terms of this cost, always think of tax as optimization. So we are not defrauding the government. We are not saying that you don't pay tax, but we are basically just optimizing tax. So as a portfolio manager, right, people don't like to use the word tax avoidance. It's not nice, right? Because yeah, that's wrong, right? We should all pay tax because it's for the social good of the society, blah blah blah, right? We are in an impact investing, green finance course, right? So we want to pay tax because tax actually provides equality for the society. Just in case, yeah, some of you are thinking, why do we pay tax? So it provides equality, so the government can provide services for everyone. So when we are a portfolio manager, we want to think tax as helping your clients optimize their tax structure so that they can obviously transfer as much wealth to the next generation. All right. So be very careful when you talk about tax. Let's say, some of y'all might want to go for a job interview, and maybe it might be a position for portfolio manager, or maybe you're an insurance agent, right? Now, as insurance agent, you do a bit of tax optimization as well. So be very careful of the term you use. So you want to optimize, right? Not avoid or not reduce. Yeah, you might reduce in the process, but you want to say optimization. It's a more positive word. All right. Any questions for tax? Any comments? Maybe you have personal experience in how you optimize your client's tax. Correct, nothing. Very good then. We'll move on to legal regulations. So legal regulations, I guess it really depends on, this is actually a very big part in portfolio management, but it will not be so heavy because this has a very strong legal kind of study that you have to go into. But basically the country's legal framework really affects the kind of investments you can go into. Okay, so this is I'm just going to sidetrack a little just for your own information. It's not definitely not tested. It's just good to know. So in the legal law, you have there are two key laws that you have. You have your common law and your civil law. Everyone heard of this? Common law and civil law? Anyone did like business law? Yeah, common law, civil law. Yeah, okay. Okay, so okay, good. That it looks like most of you has a business law kind of idea. So in common law, civil law, the idea of inheritance is very different. All right. So this is not tested, just for your own information and interest. So for example, if you are in a civil law country, so civil law countries are mostly like European countries, right? Singapore is common law. So if you are in a civil law country, if you do not write a will, or even if you write a will, the civil law prescribe that you have to inherit X amount of money, or a certain proportion of your inheritance have to go to your kids or your next of kin, basically. But let's say if you get a divorce, right? Sorry, not your kids, to your partner first. After a partner, then you can get your kids. But let's say you get a divorce and you're no longer with your wife or your husband, and you don't want to give money to them, right, when you pass away. The civil law prescribe that you cannot say, I write a will and give it to my kids. If you do that, basically your will is invalid, right? So this is just a kind of like a sidetrack for you, just for appreciation of how laws can actually affect. So in order to avoid this, what most people do is that, let's say you have an estranged partner, husband or wife, whatever, so you don't want to give them money, right? But then you know that you're in a civil law country. So what do? So a lot of people would set up either they do an insurance policy. So what happens is that you buy into a very expensive insurance policy. And because it's an insurance policy, it can be prescribed in the policy statement that the policy will be transferred to your kids. So you need not, so because it's being prescribed in a policy statement, you can't avoid the civil law requirement of passing the money to your estranged partner, and therefore you can give your kids. So this is some example of how the different laws will affect the kind of investments you can make as a portfolio manager, right? Of course, in a common law country, there's no such requirements. You don't have to definitely give your partner the money first, then your kids. All right. Okay, so that's just a side, more for your own information on appreciation of regulations and laws. Oops, sorry. Okay. Now, but for the purpose of this course, we are not going to talk so much about the law system. We are just going to focus more on trust. So someone mentioned about trust really. So I believe you might have an idea what a trust is, but I'm just going to explain to you again what a trust is. So a trust sometimes can be very vague, right? What's a trust? So basically, imagine a trust as like a a mini company, right? Or not really company, a mini entity, let's say entity. And you as the person who wants to create a trust, you are the grantor. So you actually put money or investments into this trust, right? And then when you create a trust, there'll be a trust document. And this document would prescribe, of course, what's the returns that you want in the trust, can the trust do, but more importantly, this trust, right, would name how the funds can be distributed. So in terms of distribution. And usually you do this trust system when you are going to, as in you maybe have a terminally ill disease and your kids are still very young, but you want to pass on the money to your kids, right? So you don't want your kids to spend lavishly on random stuff because they're too young, maybe they're immature, right? So you create a trust where you specify that this trust can only be used for education until, let's say, the age of 25. Then they will get a lump sum. Or maybe they will never get a lump sum. They'll just get small perpetual income throughout their entire life. So what's nice is that this trust can help you do that. And as a portfolio manager, you are, I guess, tasked to create this trust for your client if they require it. All right. So the portfolio manager basically will become a trustee, where the trustee helps to execute the purpose of the trust for your client. Okay. Everyone clear about trust before we move on to the type of trust? Yeah, okay, very good. Any comments on trust? Okay, if there's no comment, so there are two kinds of trusts that we look at: revocable and irrevocable. So there are advantages and disadvantages, right? So in a revocable trust, what happens is that when you create this trust, you can at any point of time before you pass away, change the format of the trust, right? You can change the terms of the trust, etc. But what happens is that because it's revocable, you will be subject to wealth transfer tax when you pass away. All right. So this is something you need to think about. And for example, if your trust, the value of your trust increase a lot, right? Then the wealth transfer tax that you have to pay when you are going to die or when you're dead will be very high, right? So this is something you think about. And of course, when you're dead, you no longer can change the trust. So the trust kind of protects your investments, right? So let's say if you pass away and your kids is the beneficiary of the trust, your kids cannot change the trust at all unless you stipulate in the trust documents that, oh, maybe your kids can change it when they reach a certain age, right? Now, so a revocable sounds good, right? You can change the terms anytime. But why would people do an irrevocable? So irrevocable, right, means that you cannot change the terms of the trust once you create a trust. Now, this will help you reduce your tax liability on the trust asset when you pass away, because you most likely only pay the tax on the value of the trust assets at the point the trust is created. Once it's created, okay, you no longer need to pay tax after that, even when you pass away. Of course, nowadays, you have more a hybrid kind of structure for trust. This is nothing much, it's a repeat. I'm just going to skip this. Can just read through. All right, so any questions for trust? No? Yes. So maybe you can think about any questions, but I'll just for general knowledge, most trusts are actually created in tax haven. If you if you notice. So tax havens are like, British Virgin Islands, Guernsey, um, Cayman Islands. So these are Bahamas. Yeah, correct. Bahamas. So these are very popular places to create trust, because their laws are very opaque. Opaque meaning that it's not very transparent. So you can put whatever in the trust, and no one will know unless only your trustee will know, right? The person created your trust, which is very good for you. Some people also do it in Switzerland. Switzerland is a very good place to do trust, because it's very opaque. The laws are very opaque there. Yeah. So if you ever want to do a trust, you can consider all these options. The best place to do a trust is to start doing a trust. Obviously, you don't go Bahamas to do a trust. No one will help you. You go to London, right? So London is like the hot ground for trust creation. So you go London, you approach a banker, the banker will refer you and blah, 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 and you can create a trust there. All right. So in case anyone will create a trust, you can visit London. All right. So yes, so for unique, let's move on to unique circumstances. These are just some points of considerations. They are not limited to these examples. But remember, this is the last component of IPS that you need to take account, right? So some considerations, ESG, whether you want the morals. So because we are in a impact financing course, right? So we need to think about ESG issues. Whether you want some prohibition of strategy, so philanthropy kind of thing. So basically all these are like the investor, your client's kind of personal requirements, right? That is not, time horizon, risk objective, blah, 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 everything that we mentioned earlier. So these are more like unique circumstances for your clients. So these are just some examples. It's not limited to all this. Right? So this is, again, a broad overview. So remember, you have your return requirements, your risk tolerance, and then you have all these components here, right? And remember, unique circumstances, you have many things, your time horizon, etc. And your risk tolerance, you have two things, right? Ability and willingness, and all these things would go into your IPS here. Okay. So we'll look at, I think, two examples in a bit. But let's quickly take, let's say, another 7 minutes break. We'll be back at 7:08, I guess. Yeah, 7:08. We can have a quick coffee break, toilet break, and then we'll carry on with the last part of the lecture. Hello, welcome back. I hope you have a short break, have some coffee or tea, went to the toilet. Yeah, so I mentioned the first lecture is a lot of theory, so it might be a bit dry. So hopefully you guys are still okay. Yeah, I put in some like real life example, right? So that it's a bit more interesting. Okay, so let's continue. Now, classes of assets. I don't think I'll go through. I think most of your already second, third, or fourth year, you all should know equity, income. Nothing much to go through. Alternative assets. Just now we talk about REITs, we talk about real estate. These are some issues that you need to think about. It's lumpy, it's illiquid. Private equity, usually most of the time you don't really get access to it. Access meaning that you cannot invest in private equity. But of course, it depends on who your clients are, right? Hedge fund, commodities, these are a bit more inaccessible. What's more important, I think, to highlight to you is that what are the risks of the classes of assets? All right. So equity, provides future growth, but heavy reliance will expose the portfolio to economic risk or economic cycle. This is something to think about. Bonds reduce risk. And it provides constant regular income from the coupons that we talk about. Goal, this is very important. In case any case study comes out and then they talk about hedging against inflation. So I hope all of you know what hedging is. If you don't, just sound off in the comments. Hedging basically, so if you hedge against inflation, any devaluation, you always use gold. So now in the market, it's a perfect time to, not really perfect, perfect was last year, but it's a good time to buy gold now because inflation is crazy, right? So if you bought gold last year, I think you're making good money now. Commodities. Now, commodities, we think about it as like, it can be agri-commodities, it can be metal, it can be basically any commodities, right? But the issue with commodities is that they usually follow the economic cycle as well. So they follow the up and down of bonds and equities. So they might not be too good, right? If you are just focusing on commodities. We talk about real estate, it might hedge against inflation, but they're illiquid, very lumpy. Of course, there are some alternatives as well, right? So these kind of assets are the things that, as a portfolio manager, you must consider when constructing your portfolio, right, in your planning phase. After listening to everything that your client has said, I'd like to remind you again that most of the time your clients might not be as financially literate as you, having taken this course, of course. And so they will tell you one big bunch of things, right? And then from there, you need to dissect the components that we talk about, risk objective, risk return objective, risk tolerance, etc., unique circumstances. And from there, you suggest type of assets, right? Based on this risk of the assets that we see here, right? So you suggest type of assets, you build the portfolio, and that's where you have certain allocation to the asset class, right? Based on the circumstances of your client. Okay, so now the question is, who are your clients? Yes, they might be high net worth individuals. They might be you and me, that's normal people, even though actually I think normal people, we don't really need a portfolio manager for that. Most of the time, high net worth individuals, family officers. So what are family officers? So family officers, basically, they are like very rich family that they are so wealthy in the sense that they need an office to manage their income, right? Because they have like tax and everything. They need accountant, they need an investment person to help invest their assets. So their family is so, I guess, wealthy to the point that they need an office to manage their finance. So this is a family office. That's how you think about it, right? So don't worry too much about this. Looks very complex. work for them. Well, you will have to search Google like family officers in Singapore. Okay, but a bit from what I heard in the market, the issue with family officers is that because it's family owned, so this is something you think about when if you want to work for them, right? You need to consider that there are a lot of family feuds, meaning conflicts. So just now I mentioned about the house example, right? You have two kids, you only have one house. That's a very simple conflict. But in big family officers, there's usually a lot of issues because there's a lot of internal fighting for wealth. So sometimes working from there can be very stressful because one daughter might tell you some of the things, and then the other son might say one this and that, and then you are like stuck in the in between, right? Because you are the portfolio manager. So something to think about. It might be fun, it might be interesting. Yeah. Okay, so if you ever want to work for them, you can either be an advisor here, the advisor, or you can be a discretionary manager. So advisor means that you only advise, you don't execute any plan for them, right? So you cannot do anything without their approval. So you're just advising. Now, if you are a discretionary kind of manager, you can invest for your client based on the mandate that you have drafted. The mandate meaning your APS that we talk about. So what's the risk objective, risk return, blah, 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 everything that we talk about. So there are just two kinds. Yeah, then don't worry too much. All these are just some examples of what advisory is. These are more discretionary. Yeah. Right. Okay, so much about family officers and high net worth individuals. Now, this one might be a bit foreign to most people in Singapore because we don't really have this concept of pension anymore. But what is a pension, right? In the most like layman terms, is that once you stop working, the government will just pay you every month. Right? So this pension system is very common in the UK. In fact, it's still happening now. And of course, when if you read the news, there are like strikes and stuff, because like the government might say, oh, we want to reduce the pension, and people get upset, right? So our form of pension is more of the CPF, but the CPF is not really a pension. We will see why. Okay, so there are two kind of pension plans. We have the defined benefit and defined contribution. So we need to understand what is the difference between defined benefit and defined contribution. So in a defined benefit plan, basically you are defining what the term says. You are defining the benefit of the pension plan, right? You're not defining what is being contributed. So we'll look at the difference in a bit. So what it means that once the contribution is made, the plan sponsor, basically the company funding the pension, is fulfilled. So the company just provide you the benefit, and that's all. They don't really bother too much after that. Now, defined contribution is when the company contributes to your plan and then let you do the rest of the stuff yourself, right? Where you want to invest and all, they recommend you some stuff to invest in, right? So those two are different. We'll look at more differences here. So in terms of the employer, right? So we look at defined contribution first. This might be a bit easier because defined contribution is almost like your CPF, right? Almost, but their CPF is not really a pension plan, all right? So defined contribution is that the employer promised to give you a certain amount of money, all right? So the only liability to your employer, your company that you're working for, is to give you this money. And then after that, they will tell you, oh, there are A, B, C, D plans. You can invest this money in whatever investment vehicle that you want. And they will not take responsibility of what happened. Let's say you invest in plan A, but plan A performed very badly. Too bad. That's your liability, that's all. Right? So this is the defined contribution, a bit like your CPF, because CPF gives you money. I mean, your employer contributes to your CPF. So it's like a bit like CPF, right? Now, for defined benefit, this is different. So defined benefit, right, is that your employer would be responsible for managing the asset and the plan. So at the end of the day, right, the employer would just say like, okay, when you retire, we'll give you, let's say 5K every month. So how they get this 5K through investment plan A, B, C is not your concern. You don't care. You just know that you will get 5K and that's all. So that's defined benefit. Okay, now for the employee point of view, let's look at defined contribution again. Let's look at this one first. So employee plans his own asset. We mentioned it bears the risk or consequence of investing, must make investment decisions, right? Your investment plan A, B, C, or D, right? Now, for defined benefit, they will have to, I mean, if there's a early termination, basically, if your employee is being kicked out, not kicked out, but like let's say he has some illness, he needs to leave the company early, then you are responsible to provide the pension payout early, right? Meaning you have to pay the employee for, supposed to be, let's say, for 15 years, but now you have to pay for 20 years because your employee leaves earlier. So you're subject to this risk. All right. Any questions for this? Okay, there's still quite a bit we have to go through, but let's see where I can finish this. Okay, so risk considerations for defined benefit plan. This is something that you can read through. Basically, the financial status or profitability of the sponsors. Remember, defined benefit is that the company will have to invest for you, right? So it really depends on how well the company is doing, whether the investments for you is good. Yeah, so these are some risks that you need to consider. Of course, correlation. We know that you want a negative correlation between assets. Of course, the plan features. How old is your workforce? So how much of the workforce is going to retire? For example, if you have a large workforce that is going to retire soon, your liability as an employer will be very high, right? So how much you need to consider that your time horizon of your workforce that's still actively working. So this will affect your defined benefit. Okay. Now this status is very important. So how is your pension plan status like? Whether is it fully funded, overfunded, underfunded? So fully funded means that you have the same amount of value of the assets to your present value of liabilities. So basically, it means that, let's say you have to pay out all your liabilities immediately, you're able to cover it because it's fully funded. Overfunded is fine as well, which is very good. Means that you have enough assets to cover your liabilities. But a lot of the time, right, most companies underfunded. Means what? They have a smaller amount of assets compared to their present value of their liabilities. So your present value of your pension liability is very high, right? Especially as we go into an aging population across the world, maybe not for India and China, but across most of the world, we are aging, right? There's an aging population. So there's a very heavy burden on the pension plan system, which is why even the government in Singapore stopped having the pension plan, right? So most funds are now underfunded, which is an issue. All right, so let's look at a typical IPS for a defined benefit plan. So these are this, as I mentioned, I put a lot of details in the slides. So these are something that you just keep in the back of your mind when you do a case study question. So basically, for a pension plan, you want to make sure you meet your minimum returns. Generally, risk, you are a bit more conservative, but it really depends on your funded status. So are you fully funded? Are you semi-funded, overfunded? So if you are unfunded or maybe even semi-funded, then your risk might be lower, right? If you're overfunded, you can take more risk. Liquidity, how soon you have to pay your employees. Are you tax exempt? Usually you are as a pension plan because you are providing benefits, retirement benefits. Risk horizon, how old is your workforce? All right, legal requirement. So ERISA is a pension plan law regulations. All right, and any unique circumstances, right? For example, if you are if there's any ESG kind of unique circumstances for your pension plan kind of investments. All right, any questions for your IPS? I guess this is perhaps the more important part of a pension plan because at the end of the day, we're talking about IPS, right? Remember the first topic, today's lecture is about IPS, how you construct an IPS for your client. All right, I guess no question. So remember, when we think about, when you are a portfolio manager, right? Think about your client not only as individuals. So as a portfolio manager, your client can be, like we mentioned, pension plans, or it can be a company, right? Asking you to manage the pension plan for them. So their clients are, I mean, as a portfolio manager, you have many clients. So don't just think about individuals. Now, for defined contribution, so overall objective and constraints. So ONC, this is a bit short, objective and constraints. So yeah, so just read this through. We can have a look. I think we have an example. Okay, so I want to go to this example instead. Can I read that one? This will give you some clues on how this kind of this topic can be tested, right? So now we have this UK-based company. So those in red are important things to take note of. So they are in a mature industry. They have this current defined benefit plan with declining ratio plan assets and plan liabilities. Oh, declining means that is it overfunded or underfunded? Anyone? It's actually under. Okay, please think it's under, right? Yeah, under. Because a declining ratio of planned assets and planned liabilities. So that means the number of assets to liabilities is declining. All right, under. Okay, yeah, don't worry. If you are, yeah, this is a class with, if you have a mistake, we will learn. In fact, I think you learn better if you make mistakes. Okay, so it's not available for new employees. Now, when you read this kind of question, try to think about the implications. If it's not available for new employees, what it means is that new employees, first of all, they will not benefit from a plan, so the company will not pay out to these employees, right? But at the same time, it means that the new employees will not be contributing to this plan, all right? So there's these two implications. Okay, so it's made of portfolio of equity and GITs are like bonds. There's low interest and weak equity market. So these the market conditions. Remember we talked about IPS. These are like market conditions now. You have for actual purpose. You have these returns and discount of this. Right. Now, remember the questions are a bit longer. So this is still the question. They give you all information. Oh, the workforce is this, and this is the average company. So market average. So can you see your workforce is older than your market average in your company? Number of years of service is also older than your market average, meaning that you have to pay more pension, because if they work longer, you have to pay more, right? Ratio of assets to plan liabilities, can you see that is lower, which is not so good, means that your status is more likely underfunded or pension is underfunded. Ratio of retiree is higher than the market, not good, means that you pay more. Profitability is low, which is bad. That means you are not going to profit so much, means you have not so much money to fund your pensions. Debt is very high. Okay, so it's bad as well because you have a lot of interest. Okay. Now, so this is a typical question. So they ask you to judge whether Hope, so now you're a board of trustees. So they ask you to judge whether Hope's pension plan is below average or above average with tolerance, and support your answer with 4 reasons. So maybe, I mean, the answer is in the next page, but any of y'all can just quickly say whether it's below average or above risk tolerance. So anyone knows whether it should be above, below, or average? So you will need to, in exams and all, you need to argue your point, right? So you need to provide justifications. Sometimes multiple answers might get accepted. So, okay, so in light of the time, I'll just carry on. So this one is below average, because just now we mentioned a few things really. Remember we mentioned that it's underfunded, all right? The workforce are very old, right? And then there is a high likelihood of very high retirement. They have longer years of service. Longer years of service means that you have to pay more as a company, right? Giving pension. High debt to equity ratio and low profitability. So you have no money to fund your pension plan. So actually this is quite bad for a pension plan, for a company, right? So imagine you're working in this company, you might be a bit worried for your pension plan, whether the company can pay out. All right. So now the question carry on to part B. They ask you whether the pension plan's liquidity requirement is high, low, or similar, and the time horizon. So maybe you can type in a group chat or unmute yourself. Do you think the liquidity requirement is high, low, or similar, and the time horizon? Which one? Yeah, before looking at answers at the back, see whether you understand the concept so far. Yeah, you can type in the group chat, you can unmute yourself, you can share your reasoning so everyone can learn. So we have 2 parts, liquidity and time horizon. So which one is low, which one is high? Okay, I think I can see some varying answers for liquidity. Okay, there's some say low, some say high. Yeah, okay. How about time horizon? Should we be short or long? Okay, right. Thanks for some answers. Short. Okay, remember pension plan sometimes is for the, yeah. Okay. All right, so let's have a look. So liquidity, I think some of you rightly pointed out that liquidity is high. Yes. Why? Because let me see, the high liquidity is unfunded. Very good. So yes, you can give this answer is unfunded. But remember in your tests, in your exams, or even your assignments, do give some explanation. So remember, you have very high ratio of people that's going to retire soon, right? So that means you need a lot of money to pay out your pension. So you have high liquidity requirements. And of course, your workforce is old as well. So you need to, most of them will retire very soon. Now, remember the new employees part. So these new employees will receive no contribution, therefore increasing the cash outflow required from the pension plan, because new employees will not contribute to the pension plan, right? Because they are excluded. All right. Yeah, unfunded. That's why we again most of you all pick this up. So if you notice, right, for this kind of case study question, you need to be very sensitive to like all the details that's being stated in the question. And in order to be sensitive to the details, you will have to have a general knowledge of what to look out for. So I hope that whatever I went through earlier, you kind of pick up like what you need to look out for in the case study so that you can answer the case study, right? Now, in terms of the time horizon, I think most of you all got it right. I think all of you all got it right. Like all you all say short, right? So yes, it's a short horizon because your workforce is older, so they'll retire very soon. So you need the money in a short horizon. They are not like retiring in 10 years time, right? Maybe they retire in 3 or 4 years time. Okay. And of course, because the plan is not accepting new members, it's not very long because people will retire very soon, right? Okay. Now, there's the last part. So, in fact, even for me, I was like, oh, this question is so long, but yes, it's a very long question. Now you have to calculate the rate, let me see. So they ask you to judge whether the change in the rate to 6% would cause the funded status of the plan to tolerate or improve. All right. So remember what's the previous percentage? So the previous percentage is, I believe, is 5%. Let me see, what is it? 8%, no, 7%. So previously the discount rate for liability is 7%. Now they say that it is going to drop to 6%. All right. So remember your time value of money, right? If your percentage, your discount rate decrease, what happened to your PV? Anyone can say? Your PV will happen. If your discount rate decrease, your present value of your whatever you're calculating will bigger. Yes, that's right. Become bigger, right? So it means that your liabilities will be bigger, which is a bad thing, right? So actually your status would deteriorate. Okay, so it's not improved because now we're talking about liabilities, remember? Yeah, you will deteriorate. So it's bad, right? So what mentioned here is right. So you reduce your discount rate, your PV become bigger, that means your liability become bigger and you deteriorate. Okay. Now, but that's not enough. You have to this one they didn't ask you to calculate. Okay, not too bad. I think it's the next one they ask you to calculate the actual the rates. Okay, so yeah, so this one you will deteriorate. Anyway, let's explain. All right. Any questions for this example, this case study example? All right, no questions. Let's proceed on to foundations. And so there are two foundations and endowment. So this endowment foundations. So these two are quite similar in terms of the way the IPS is structured, right? Your investment policy statement is structured. But the purpose are very different. Foundations are more like from a single donor, they're more private. When you think about endowments, right? They are more like your university. So university usually has like endowment fund where they invest in certain things, right? So that they can pay the various operations and all those things, right? Endowments, museums, etc. What's important is that yes, you need to know how to differentiate between endowment and foundation, but what's important is that IPS are actually quite similar. So that's a good thing. Now, let's look at a typical risk consideration for endowment and foundation. All right. So what's important is that they have to meet their annual spending rates, inflation, and investment costs. So you need to make sure that your foundation and endowment able to cover your running costs of your foundation, right? Normally they have a high risk tolerance, all right? But of course, if their level of spending is very high, then the risk tolerance might be low, okay? Their portfolio is generally perpetual, meaning what? Like, for example, your university kind of endowment, your university is supposed to last for, is alive forever, right? It's not going to close down tomorrow or next year. So because of that, the endowment for your university is perpetual. Okay. So entity may or may not solicit new funds. I think most of your, probably all of you have not graduated yet, right? But if this is your second degree, you might notice that your alumni university will actually approach you for money. And this is not uncommon. So when you graduate from SUSS, occasionally we'll receive emails from SUSS asking you, oh, do you want to do a donation and this kind of thing. So these are actually to solicit new funds. So for the next generation of students, they will have money, there will be enough funds for the running of the university, right? Because university at the end of the day is non-profit or not-for-profit. But not-for-profit does not mean they don't make money. They still need to make money to cover the running costs, right? So just want to highlight here, the ability to take risks might be low. Okay. So something you just take note that there are perpetual portfolios. So they might buy things like perpetuals or perpetuities. So perpetuities can include certain bonds, government bonds that are perpetuals, right? They do have a legal mandate to distribute funds. So this is important to take note. In order to maintain their tax-exempt status, they need to distribute certain amount of funds out. Distribute in terms of what? Let's say for university, it can be in terms of a scholarship to students, right? So some of you all might be on scholarship, and this scholarship money comes from the endowment, right? And generally for endowment and foundation, the main capital of the endowment should not deteriorate. Meaning what? That whatever they spend should be based on the let's say dividends from the endowment or like the investment gains from the funds. But the core fund, right, cannot be eroded away in the process of distributing funds out. All right. Okay, there are some regulations that regulate endowments. Okay, so the risks and returns, I want to quickly mention that they need to cover spending, inflation, management fees, such as your education, health costs, risk. They range from moderate and high, right? Whether they can take on more risk, because they are typically perpetual, means that they can the time horizon is long, they might be able to take on more risk. They are tax exempt because they are for the good of the society, right? So generally tax exempt. But they need to meet certain distribution requirements. Liquidity needs generally low, but if they have any planned capex, everyone know what's a capex? Does everyone know capex? Yeah. No? Okay. Yeah, okay, so capital expenditure. So some of you might not know what's a capital expenditure. So capital expenditure could be, let's say, buying a building, or let's say buying renovating a building, or buying a piece of land. So for example, like SUSS, if you are in campus, you notice that there's quite a bit of construction going on and stuff. Okay, but that cannot be owned by SUSS. But yes, if there's any construction or buying of land, those are capital expenditure, which is usually paid either by donations or by the foundation, the gains from the foundation or endowment, right? Okay, so legal aspects, not going to mention again, these are the legal requirements. Uniqueness, okay. So recently, right, there were a lot of issues with endowment on universities. So I'll give you a good example is that what they found out I think in the Ivy League colleges in the US, is that a lot of their endowment were actually investing in very dirty investment. Dirty investment means what? Oil and gas, coal mining, right? So those are very dirty kind of industries. And a lot of these endowments, even actually in Singapore, I believe NUS and even SMU, they are investing in very dirty kind of industries. And there were a lot of, there are some reports going on that actually for university, is there a need to invest in such dirty industry? And because as we are progressing towards more sustainability, right? And at the end of the day, this is a green finance module or impact financing module, impact investing module. So there's a lot of question whether there is a need to invest in such industry. And should there be some restrictions in terms of ESG kind of requirements, right? So this is something that to think about. And of course, sales of donated assets. So what happened is that sometimes you have very rich alumni that make it big in the industry. So they might donate certain assets. So I'll give you an example. It's like, for example, maybe not in Singapore, but in the US, sometimes the alumni, let's say they own a park, like a national park. So they can actually donate the national park to the endowment. Now, the question is that what's the university supposed to do with a national park, right? So here in Canada, there's actually a national park owned by the university called McGill, if some of you all know McGill. So what can they do with the national park? So there's some uniqueness in terms of the sales of this kind of donated assets. Sometimes the alumni say you cannot sell it. So then what do you do with it? You manage the national park, you employ rangers for the national park. That's so strange, right? A university owning a national park. So these are some unique circumstances, right, in a foundation. All right, so let's try to quickly go through this case study. Again, Hope Foundation. Now, there's a few important things to take note of. So there are quite a few numbers as well. In this example, we see that this foundation contributes 75 to 80% of the clinic operations, right? Here, okay. It estimates this year's spending to be this amount, all right? There's a management expense of 0.4% and 4 million funding for a new facility. So this is your capex, this is your capex for within 6 months. Now, healthcare cost is going to grow by 1%, and there's going to be inflation of 1.5%. Now, we see that this foundation has a diversified portfolio of 200 million, and it has 100% stake. So this is not uncommon that the foundation actually owns a company. But in this IT consultancy, which was a gift. Now, the problem is that, or not the problem, is that it generates this pre-tax profit of this, and I believe this foundation wants to sell away this IT company later in the question. But annual contribution from the sponsors will has ended last year. So the sponsors will not contribute 2 million. So they are not going to contribute anymore. So these are some things you need to think about. All right, so even more things, they say that the Board of Trustees designed the portion of portfolio to have a reserve of 15%. Now, the board is willing to accept certain risk level. They say they give a 2 standard deviation or minus 14% from last year is acceptable. And the board has expressed interest to sell the IT firm to reduce oversight costs or oversight requirement. All right. Okay, so can you see this question now? They ask you to formulate the risk objective for the investment statement of Hope. So basically, you need to talk about the risk, right? And then return objective. So remember, risk is tolerance, ability and willingness and all those things, right? And then they say formulate the return objective. And then last but not least, you need to calculate the rate of return. So any issue or calculation. So yeah, just take note that these kind of questions can be quite demanding. So you need to read the question very carefully and answer, right? Okay, so this question is good. They tell you that you need to formulate your answers in terms of these 5 aspects which we talked about earlier. All right, so let's go step by step. Remember, we talk about risk, ability, and willingness, right? So willingness to take risks. Now, maybe they might actually have above average willingness, right? Because the board desire to grow the rate, I think is it 1% or 1.5% above inflation, right? 1% above inflation, if I'm not wrong. And of course, it has a long-term time horizon, so you can take on more risk. And it doesn't mind a 14% shortfall, which is quite a lot actually. That means if you lose 14% returns, you still don't mind. So actually it's above average willingness, right? Now it's ability. So we need to answer a question based on the context, right? So they say that, oh, you know what? There's a the 2 million contribution was stopped. Okay, so this is bad. This would reduce our ability. And then you need to provide 75 to 80% of the clinic budget. Okay, so this spending rate of 1.5%, we need to calculate it later. 5.1%, sorry. And then there is an outlay of 4 million, right? For the capex requirement. So can you see that you're now putting in all the various components of ability into this question? So actually at the end of the day, right, the ability of hope is actually more average because they're losing a source of income from the sponsor, and then they have a capex. And remember the metrics, the risk metrics. If you have high willingness but maybe average ability, always be conservative. Say that overall, actually, you know what? You have just an average risk tolerance because the ability is not very high. Okay, I'll just pause here. Any questions? So this is a very typical kind of way you should be explaining your case study. All right, you need to go into really detail to bring up all the various components of the case study. Any questions? Any comments? You know, I say you can unmute yourself if you have any comments. Nope, we're all good. Okay, remember, don't be afraid to ask questions because you learn more when you're asking questions. All right. Okay, so we move quickly on to the return objective. So return objective, of course, you know, hope being a foundation, you know, you have long-term financing that's required. It needs to generate return that is I think above 1% above the inflation. Let me just quickly check again so I don't mention it wrongly. It needs to, oh, sorry, healthcare cost has grown 1% above the inflation. So it needs to have a 2.5%, right? It needs to be above that. And remember, it has a management expense. It needs to pay management fees as well. As well as paying management fees. Okay. So now, since the question asks you to calculate, I still hope you remember how to do this calculation. So you need to determine, first of all, what's the spending amount, right? So remember just now they say that this year, Hope is going to get 11 million, but this 11 million, right, is pre-tax, and the tax rate is 20%, if I'm not wrong. Can you just flip back and check? So basically, you just take 11 million times 0.8. This should give you 10, if I'm not wrong. Yeah, 10. Let me just quickly check. What's the tax rate? Yeah, tax rate 20%. So so your revenue that you get will have to be taxed. At the same time, you know that you need to buy a new facility. So your portfolio, your size of your funds will be reduced by 4 million, which is substantial. you need to take account the annual inflation and your excess, your healthcare on top of the inflation, which is 1%. Now, your management expenses, remember, is 0.4%. So if you add all this up, you get 8%. So this is your minimum requirement, return requirement. So I want to highlight to you that alternative method of calculating is you multiply them. So you multiply them, you should get this amount. So both answers are acceptable, right? Whether you add or multiply is fine, no difference. So there's a 15% spending budget that has to be set aside. This one, you don't have to take account because it's not part of your asset allocation. Any questions for this example? I believe this is, there's still, oh yeah, right. Sorry, so this return objective, we still need to talk about, because they give you the categories, right? So we still need to talk about time horizon, long-term, not surprising because it's a foundation. Tax, remember, we need to talk about how foundations are generally tax exempt if they are able to distribute a certain percentage. And in the previous slides, we mentioned, I think it's 3 to 6% distribution. So this one they just say is 5%, fine. Liquidity requirements, we need to mention about the 15% that has to be set aside. And then we talk about the additional cash outlay for the new facility. Okay, we quickly move on to the legal regulation. So the question is a bit long. So we talk about the legal framework. So this Uniform Management Institutional Fund, just now I mentioned it, actually it's not I mentioned, but it's in the slides about the regulations that's covering foundations or endowments, right? So you can refer back to the slides. Unique circumstances, this is because the board is going to sell this IT firm. So, so it's something that you need to take account of, because they'll get a lump sum, but at the same time, they'll have reduced oversight costs. So any questions for this example? We are good. Okay, so if we are good, I know we have only 5 more minutes. I think we can quickly go through insurance. Like I say, this first lecture is quite long. Okay, so insurance. Now, when we think about insurance, we need to think about 2 kinds of insurance, right? I'll just give a very broad kind of understanding of insurance. First of all, there's life insurance that you buy for death. When you die, then you get like money, right? And then you have non-life insurance where you buy, for example, you go traveling, you buy like a travel insurance, and these are like casualty insurance. If something happened, you get paid, right? So whether it's life insurance or casualty insurance, they are very different, right? In terms of the risk, in terms of return. So those are something you take note of. And remember, at the end of the day, right, we are talking about clients. So all these insurance companies are clients to you, right? They might approach you to do certain things. So let's think about the risk considerations for life insurance, right? So life insurance, generally, valuation, you think about any surplus, any credit risk of your clients, right? Whether were they bankrupt or what. Generally, cash flow is quite predictable because it's for life. So you contribute like a small sum every month, all right? And then after that, you get payout for your life, right? You need to think about interest rates, because if you're an insurance company, you need to know what to invest in, whether it's high yield or low yield kind of insurance. Portfolio segments, payout. Yeah, so these are something interesting to think of. All right. Okay, so for IPS of life insurance, so this is just an example in case there's a question of insurance. These are some things that you should think about. So return, generally you need a minimum kind of return to meet these the payout policies for your policy holder. You need to ensure capital adequacy requirements. So usually there is some regulations that require to have a minimum amount of capital that is in the insurance company. So you need to make sure that you maintain this. So there are some total return measures, basically whether it's a capital gain or like regular kind of income. Generally, your risk tolerance will be low because you need to ensure that you have enough money to pay out when the person, let's say, retire or pass away. So it's life insurance, right? Now, time horizon, it can be short or long depending on your customer, right? If you're an insurance company. Now, insurance can be very complex in terms of tax. So they might be tax exempt, but it really depends. Liquidity, generally, their liquidity of the insurance company is quite low. You don't really need a lot of liquidity to be available. Yeah, because you pay out regular payments to your policy holders. Legal can be, I'm not going to go through this, but it can be very complex. Unique kind of thing, it can be, a very diverse kind of investment product for the insurance company, right? Okay, so I know we have only 1 more minute, but I'll just quickly summarize this. So for a non-life insurance, because it's more about casualty, right? So then the kind of payout they have to do is more lumpy, as in it's more up and down. So there's a bit more unpredictable kind of payout policy, maybe a bit more lower risk tolerance because you don't know how much you need payout, right? So the investment income must be predictable in order to ensure certain payout that's required. Maybe risk tolerance might be also low as well. All right. Okay, so in terms of further risk considerations, let's look at the time horizon. Maybe it's shorter because it's not life insurance, right? Usually you buy, let's say, a travel policy, it might be for 30 days. It's pretty short, right? So you need to, as an insurance company, you need to make sure that you have enough investment horizon for this short term. Tax, as usual, is a bit complex. Liquidity, you need to focus on short term. All right, regulation can be complex and any unique products. So this is a summary of insurance. You can just look through this. Okay, I'll not go through banks because there's not too much information. You can just read through. This is a summary of all the various clients as a portfolio manager that you can take into account. And I think that's all. This is, okay, so this is, I believe, a mandatory reading about the code of conduct under the CFA. So please refer to this to have a read through. I believe it will be tested in, I think, the TMA. Right. Okay, so I guess we overrun slightly because it's quite a bit of content to cover. That's all for today. Any questions, you have any thing can stay back for a little while, you can ask me, type in the group chat. Remember to send me your GBA groupings by today, by the end of today. And I know it's around 10 p.m. Probably you guys want to have a good rest. Thanks for attending the lesson. I'll see you next week. And I'll try to post the slides by this weekend so you guys can look through it. I recommend you all to read through the slides again because this part of the lecture is quite important, the first one. All right. Yeah. Thanks for attending. Yeah, no problem. Remember send the GBA grouping. Have a good night. Yeah. Hope you enjoy the lecture. Yeah. Thank you. Happy New Year to all.